And so today we're going to work on citing all those, creating a works cited and an outline based on your reading of the poem and your sources. So when we're talking about this paper, there are a couple of different objectives that I want you to reach with this. So the first one is we talked about the elements of poetry last Wednesday. So I want you to be able to, in your paper, identify how the poet is creating the theme through those elements of poetry, and then you're going to use your sources to support your argument. Okay? So as we create our outline today, that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we're going to create an outline together. So if you guys want to go ahead and pull up your, if you want to pull up your own outline, just open a new document in Word. Then we can just kind of follow along. So I'm going to show you how to format everything correctly so everything just looks beautiful. So I'll give you just a minute to get that new document up. Y'all just have to holler at me if I go too fast, okay? All right, so on your outline, you want to have your name and the class and the date. What is today? 25th. And I feel like there's some, oh, you're supposed to have my name, but I'm not going to do that today. And then you want your title. So I'm just going to call this the poetry outline. That's easy. So I'm going to center my heading, but I'm not doing anything else special to it. And then I'm just going to select everything and make everything double spaced. So one thing I want you guys to check is double check your line spacing options. Make sure that everything is 0. All of these 4 things should all say 0. Otherwise, it's going to add extra space between your paragraphs, and you don't want to do that. Okay. All right, and just notice that there's already this formatting double space already gives me all of the different spacing that I need for my outline, so I don't need to do any extra spaces. So a lot of times I find myself commenting a lot on papers, no extra spaces, no extra spaces, don't put any extra spaces. MLA doesn't have any extra spaces or any special formatting. So titles are not bolded or giant font or underlined or anything. They're just the same font and size as everything else. Okay, so when I do an outline, I just use regular Arabic numbers and then lowercase letters. For my points, you can use capital letters and lowercase letters, or you can use Roman numerals and then Arabic numerals. You can do anything you want as long as you're showing a hierarchy of your points, okay? So who remembers first paragraph of every paper is what?
Excuse me. Sorry.
It is the introduction.
It is the introduction, that's right. So that's paragraph number 1 is going to be introduction. So who remembers the 3 parts of the introduction? What comes first? The hook comes first, and then
attention grabber.
Nope, the hook is the attention grabber.
Oh, it is, okay.
Same thing. Anybody? What's the third thing? What's the last thing in the intro?
Thesis.
Thesis?
Thesis, right. So the middle thing is the bridge between your attention getter and your thesis, and that's your intro to the topic. Okay, so in this case, our introduction to the topic is going to be our author and the name of the poem. Okay, so if you want to just, that's what you want to put here. So for mine, if I use my Shakespeare, I have Sonnet 66 by Shakespeare. That's basically what I want to have in that sentence. But I might not know what I'm going to put for that sentence until I get to the end of my paper, because I don't know yet what I want to use for my hook. So you guys might not know what you want to do first. And this is one of the places where people hit a roadblock because they think they have to write their paper in the exact same order as you read it, and you don't. So a lot of the times your hook is the last thing that you write. So it's okay to leave that blank for now, okay? So your thesis is basically the theme of the poem, okay? So you guys wrote your, for this week, you had to write your response to your poem. So you should all know what your theme is to your poem. What is the author trying to get across? So in this particular poem or sonnet, Shakespeare's trying to say that no matter how difficult life seems, the love of one person is enough to make life worth living, okay? So if I'm going to write that out as a thesis, what I want to do is I want to think about, okay, what tactics does Shakespeare use in order to make that theme apparent? Okay, so I've already done some brainstorming on that and I have my list. So I want you guys to think about this. You might want to jot some ideas down. What are some of the elements of poetry? So you want to choose at least 3. What are 3 elements of poetry that your author uses that help to create the theme? So in this particular sonnet, he makes an emotional plea. He uses irony. He uses some things that we haven't talked about in this class, but a syndeton, an antithesis, and parallel structures. But you guys, your authors might use metaphors. They might use similes. They might use irony. They might use personification. So think about all of those things that we talked about when we talked about the elements of poetry. So if you remember that video with the girl with the crazy hair that kept falling in her eyes, think about all of the things that she talked about, how those elements can make the theme stronger. So try to come up with 3 right now that you can use. Okay. So what you're going to do for your thesis, you want to combine those things. You want to combine the 2 things, those 3 elements of poetry and the theme of the poem. So your thesis is going to look something like this. Of the 2 things in this sonnet, so you would say in this poem, whatever your author is, your author's last name, because you've already introduced them in this intro to the topic, so you don't ever need to say their first name again. Okay, so if you're writing about Emily Dickinson, you don't ever call her Emily because she's not your best friend, okay? Once you give the author's full name one time, then that's it. You refer to them by their last name for the rest of your paper. So in this sonnet, Shakespeare uses, so then you're going to say, what do they use? So your 3 things go here. So maybe it's metaphors, similes, and personification. Maybe it's rhyme or diction, or, you know, a couple of you chose Langston Hughes. So diction is a huge one in that poem. He's talking in that Southern dialect so that you can hear the voice of the mama, right, talking. And so it's important to think about all of those things. So the 3 most important things to show that, and then there's your theme. So you guys see how there's 3 components there, right? You have the in this poem and the author's last name uses those 3 things that you picked out of the poem in order to show, and then you write down the theme. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. So as you move forward, your thesis might evolve a little bit. It might get a little bit clearer. It might be written more elegantly, but for now, that's what you need. If you have those things in your thesis, then you've got it. That's the foundation of your paper is your thesis. That's your argument. So you want to have those things. So if your thesis looks something like what I have here, you are good to go. Okay, so the next paragraph in our paper, do you guys from 101 remember what we did for the second paragraph usually? Did that paragraph give us?
Like a background?
Exactly. So if we're talking about a poem, what kind of background information might we give here?
The author or the writer.
Exactly. So you can talk about the author and any special circumstances about the poem. And also you could give a summary of the poem if your poem is longer. So for example, in Langston Hughes, you might say, in this poem, we hear the voice of a mother kind of talking about life and encouraging her son not to give up. Okay, so just a really quick 1 or 2 sentence summary. So those are the 3 things that you could include in here. So give some interesting details about the author's life, any special circumstances that the poem was written under, if it was written to a certain person. So if you guys saw the poems Meeting at Night and Parting at Morning by Elizabeth and Robert, or by Robert Barrett Browning, no, by Robert Browning, who was married to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, those poems are describing their courtship. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning was kind of a recluse. She was a pretty famous poet. She was taking care of her father, and her father did not want her to get married. He wanted her to stay home forever and take care of him. And so Robert Browning started writing her letters about poetry, and they kind of fell in love through their letters. But her dad wouldn't have anything of that. So Robert would sneak over, like row his little boat over to their house at night to meet her, and then he'd row away in the morning. So those poems have a special circumstance, right? There's some history behind them that would be good to share with readers here. Not the whole long story, okay? This needs to be just a short paragraph, but kind of think of it that way. Like what are the things that your reader might want to know about the poem? Do you guys see how that one source about your author is going to come in handy here?
Yeah.
And yes, and hopefully the source about the poem, if there are any special circumstances, you might have a quote or 2 that you can use there. This paragraph should not have a whole lot of quotes in it, but that might be a place that you use quotes, okay? So in your 3rd paragraph, now we're going to start getting into our argument. So what I'm going to do real quick here is just take each of the points. So you guys have your 3 elements of poetry. So that means you're going to have 3 paragraphs right here, 3, 4, 5. I have more because I have more things. But for each one, I'm just going to put what they are. So I have emotional plea, I have irony, I have a syndeton, and then I have antithesis, and then I have parallel structures. And then 8, of course, will be my conclusion. Okay, so you guys should have 3, 4, and 5 at a minimum. So 3 elements of poetry, and then your conclusion. And notice that this first one, the emotional plea, that's not even one of the elements of poetry. That's a little something different. So there might be something like that in your poem as well. Like maybe your author refers to something in history, has a reference to something. That might be something that's part of it. Patriotism could be part of it. All of those different things could be a part of what makes the poem's theme really shine. Okay, so the next thing that I want you guys to do to really make this outline solid is for each one of your 3 points or more, if you have more, I want you to put 1 quote from the poem itself. Okay, so you want to pull up the poem. If you don't have a copy of it printed out, pull it up on your computer, and I want you to find 1 quote from the poem that illustrates each one of these things, okay? There's a couple of different ways to do this. So while you guys are pulling up your poem and kind of thinking that through, if you guys have a poem that has multiple stanzas, so remember a stanza is like a poem's paragraph, instead of organizing by the different types of appeals, so instead of saying metaphor and then you have examples from all 3 stanzas and then similes and you have examples, you could say, in stanza 1, the author uses metaphor, simile, and personification. The next paragraph would be in stanza 2, and it's all 3. And then the next paragraph is stanza 3, and it's all 3 things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So right now, that's one of the things I want you to think about. So in this sonnet, there aren't really stanzas. But what I'm going to do and what you'll see is that my strategies here, or the elements of poetry, go in order of the poem, of the sonnet. So my emotional example is line 1. My irony example is lines 2 and 3. My ascendanton example is line basically 4 through 7. Antithesis is also 4 through 7, and parallel structures is 8 through 12. So I'm taking readers through the sonnet in the order that the lines appear. So it makes more sense to them, because we're not assuming that our reader has actually read the poem that we're describing. So the more quotes we put in from the poem and the more we keep things in order, the better off it'll be. So we read, you guys maybe, well, not all of you may have read it, but the poem, Do Not Go Gentle into that Good Night. Did you guys read that? Some of you have. So
Yeah,
we talked about the good men, the wild men, the wise men, or whatever, like all the different types of men. So in each stanza, you might want to go stanza by stanza instead of doing elements of poetry. So you'll talk about the good men first, and then you'll talk about, so he's got the repetition of do not go gentle into that good night. That's in every stanza. He has the metaphor, the reference to the different types of men. That would be another strategy maybe, or another element of poetry. So you would do each stanza would have its own paragraph, and you would talk about those 3 things in the same order in every paragraph. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're going that direction, that's fine. Just alter your outline a little bit. So if, for example, I was going to do that, I would just do this. So I'd do stanza 1, emotional plea, irony, and then maybe I would do points underneath. So A would be irony or emotional plea. B would be irony. Does that make sense? And then I'd have stanza 2, and I just copy the same thing. Okay, so hopefully that little detour gave you guys time to pull up your poem. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the quote for each one of these things. So I think I'm just going to use a bullet point so I don't forget, but I'm just going to go ahead and fill in my outline with the quotes from the sonnet that show what that is. And after each quote, I'm going to put the line number. So because we've already introduced the author and all of that, we don't have to put Shakespeare 1 after every single quote. The readers are going to know that we're talking about this poem. So any quotes from the poem, all you have to do is put the line number in parentheses, and your readers will know that it's from your poem. Okay, so I'm just going to go through each point and put in my quotes. So now that I have all of this on here, I have a really good organization for my paper. Not only do I know that I'm giving readers lines from the poem and proving that what I'm saying is here, but I have a really clear organizational pattern. So it will make it easy for them to understand the poem, even if they haven't read the poem. Okay? So hopefully you all were able to kind of follow along with that. The next part of our outline is the works cited page. So what I hope you guys see from this is that the basis of this paper is your own thoughts. It's your own reading of the poem and showing how the elements of poetry create the theme. So your sources are not the foundation of your paper. Your sources support your argument. They do not make up your argument. And that's something that you really have to learn for academic writing. When you're writing an academic argument, your argument shouldn't revolve around your sources. Your sources should support what you have to say. So we're going to start out with our outline with just what you have to say, okay? All right, so after the conclusion, this is really important, we're going to insert a page break. So if you click on the insert button, all the way over here on the left, if you click the drop down arrow, there's page break, and that brings me all the way to a new page. So this is really important because if later on I start adding in topic sentences or I start kind of giving a little bit more details for each of my points, I don't want my works cited page just shifting down, down, down this page. I want it to stay where it's supposed to be. So for the works cited, your heading should be works cited. And we're just going to center that, but it's not, again, it's not bolded. It's not underlined. It's not in giant font. It's just, it should be the same on everybody's papers, okay? So then what we're going to do, the first thing that we're going to cite on here is the actual poem, okay? So the way you cite a poem, you put the author's name first. So I guess I could put William. So we have William Shakespeare. The name of his poem is next, Sonnet 66. And I located this version of the sonnet in a book called The Necessary Shakespeare. So you all may have found your poem on the Poetry Foundation website. So that's what you would put here. You would put Poetry Foundation. And that book was published by Pearson in 2009. Now, if you guys, let's see, I'm going to edit that. So for you guys, let me give you a little quick trick. Okay, your citation. So citationmachine.net. And then I think all of the poems were cited from the Poetry Foundation. So if you guys want to go there and find your poem. So I'm just going to look for Sonnet 66. And there it is. So if I click on that actual sonnet, we're going to see if Citation Machine will give us the correct citation. So once I have the poem, I'm just going to copy it right here and then go back to Citation Machine. Are you guys following me or am I going too fast?
No, you're good.
Following you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm going to do MLA format. And then I just paste in that website, the link, and it found the correct one. So I'll select that. I'll click Final Step. So I can see that we've got the correct author or the correct title of the poem. The author's correct. The website title is there. The URL is there. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that citation. And so you can see that we have the author's name, the title, then the website. So Poetry Foundation doesn't really need to be on here twice, so we really could delete that one and just have the name of the website in italics and be done. And then the actual website URL. Okay, that makes sense? So then all you'd have to do is copy that and then paste it into wherever my other document went. I have too many things open. There we go. So then you can just paste it right in there. Okay, so then the next source that I'm going to put in here is the one from ProQuest. That was the biography. So I'm going to just copy that from my research journal and put that right over here. And then I think I liked this source, so I'm going to put my other sources in here. All right, so if you have more, you could go up and you can just copy whatever else you have on there. I might do this one just because this one I thought was really interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and put that one in too. Okay, so once I have all my sources here, I have a problem because my sources are not double spaced anymore. So what I want to do is I want to highlight all of my sources and I'm going to double space them. But then do you guys see how now I have these extra spaces between some of them?
Yes.
So I want to get rid of those extra spaces. And again, I'm just going to check the line spacing options to make sure everything's set to 0. And when we are formatting a works cited page, we want to use the hanging indent. So there's a way to do that that makes it really easy. So when you're in here in that line spacing window, you'll see special. And if you click on special, hanging is one of the options. So if I click that and choose OK, it automatically gives me a hanging indent on every source. Okay, so again, that's in this paragraph, right where you do your whether it's double space or whatever, then you click on line spacing options and it's under special. Okay, so who can tell me what is still wrong with my works cited page? Who remembers?
Needs to be alphabetized.
Yeah, alphabetized.
Alphabetized, exactly. So there's a trick for that too. So let's see if I can find it. So right here on my screen, there's an A to Z and an arrow. If you guys can find that, you can just organize your paragraphs in ascending order. I click OK, and that's it. It reorganizes them all in alphabetical order for me. So I've correctly formatted my works cited page, and I didn't really have to do anything. I used tools. I used the Cite button in the database files to get the correct citations, or I used Citation Machine to do my poem citation. I used the hanging indent to make sure everything was formatted correctly, and then I used the sort to put everything in alphabetical order. So now I have a perfect works cited page and a solid outline.